Welcome back to Clean Titans. Today, we're diving into the crucial role of the education sector in the clean energy transition. We're joined by Sebastian Fernandes, a leader in driving sustainability within education and empowering students for greener choices. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here, Ali. It's a pleasure to join you on Clean Titans.
Your work is incredibly timely and important. Could you share a bit about your journey and what sparked your passion for sustainability in education?
So my background is technically not strictly in sustainability, but it has been within me for a very long time. And my background is mainly on international education, and it was from there realizing the unique power that the education has with this global crisis and the unique power that international education had within this crisis specifically. So that's how I decided that my role could be something that could help into the transition that our planet is clearly telling us and demanding us to change our ways. And the key to that is education. So that's why I'm here, helping right now the education sector to decarbonize, to lead by example, basically.
Excellent. You've emphasized that the education sector has the unique power to fix climate change. Can you elaborate on why you believe this?
If you analyze 99% of world leaders, from politicians, judges, CEOs, managers, almost every decision maker in this planet, that's why I say 99% because there might be a few, but almost absolutely everybody has gone through the education system at different stages: elementary, high school, university. And it's a super long period of time that I've made a basic calculation comparing the average years of schooling depending on the different countries. And it's around 2,500 days that a human being that goes to university will spend at school. And it's not only the time that we spend usually as kids. If you take from kindergarten, elementary, secondary school, high school, university, it's a lot of time. It's a lot of hours you spend at school. And it's a lot of exposure to the right or wrong message in a way in what our planet needs. So I was seeing a huge discrepancy between what was being told inside a classroom, and then the very minute you step outside the classroom, you don't see that being taken into effect, into example. And that's how I realized that the education sector is the one that can influence every future decision maker. There's only one certainty we have, that the next president of almost every country is going to go through the education system. Almost every CEO in the future is going to go through the education system. So if we teach those people today by example, and they see the effects, those kids are already seeing the effects of climate change in their own backyard. But if they see the reality at school and they learn how sustainability should be applied, again, by example, not by being told what needs to do, but by seeing what is being done, then that's how the education sector, unlike any other sector, it's not going to be the technology on its own, because you can have the technology, but without the decision makers that implement that technology. So a cohesive, the education sector is the only one influencing absolutely every decision maker in this planet.
Absolutely. They say we have all the technology we need to make it happen now. So
Exactly.
you're absolutely right. What specific aspects of the education sector make it such a powerful lever for change?
Especially, as I was saying, the amount of time that students spend there, and the again 2,500 days going to school. Usually, depending, it's going to be a few hours a day. So we are not exposed to any other sector so much time in our lives. Maybe the second place we spend more time other than home is going to be the school. first maybe school. Part of that time we're sleeping, but then most of our lives as young kids is going to be at school. So it's one of the places we spend the longest time, and that we are going there to learn. We're there to be educated. So here is, again, we're not talking about politics, we're talking about science, what our planet brings us, and what we as human beings need to do to contribute to the well-being of our planet and ourselves, of course, because we can't. And also specifically to climate action and to environmental sustainability, even though there's other points that touch sustainability in general from social and other SDGs, we cannot achieve any of the other SDGs or any of the other environmental goals if we don't have a planet. We cannot have quality education if we don't have a planet. We cannot have zero hunger and no poverty if we don't have a planet. So it's greatly environmental sustainability, especially at this time, it's greatly affecting all the other sustainability goals, and that's why, in my opinion, it's the most urgent. It's an emergency that needs to take immediate action, not future action.
And it makes countries' finances more stable. With Fixterra, you're helping educational institutions fast track their journey to net zero. What are some of the biggest challenges these institutions face in achieving sustainability?
Well, mainly one of the biggest challenges is the lack of education on education institutions. Even though it's a paradox, many of the education institutions, especially elementary, secondary, high schools, not that much the universities, is the lack of training they have, the lack of literacy they have towards these subjects. They might have some science teacher, but it's not fully devoted into making the school sustainable, and that's where we help into transforming the operations into, number one, accounting for their emissions, for tracking their emissions and being able to report their emissions, to set up a baseline on which they can then grow, and showing, and with the longer term goal of reducing their emissions, but showing their progress into that, and using that as an educational tool for their communities, for their students, saying, hey, we have analyzed our emissions this year, and we have the goal to go down on our emissions by doing this, by doing that, by implementing cleaner energy, by reducing our waste, by composting, by all the different alternatives that the schools have. The challenges, in my opinion, the biggest challenge of the education sector, and that applies to almost every educational institution, is that, as I said, the education sector is the one having the biggest power, but at the same time, it's the only sector where there's a huge generational gap between the decision makers and the main stakeholder. The main, I don't usually like to call it customer, but in a way, the student is the customer of the education system. Uh, and there's a huge generational gap there. In other sectors, you don't have that. Whoever makes computers, they use them. Whoever makes cars, they drive them. Whoever owns a hotel, they stay in hotels. Usually, many other sectors, you are a client of your own sector. The education sector is not. And the generational gap between the one making the decisions and the students is the one that usually creates the biggest standing that this is a priority for the younger generations. And those can be seen in the statistics for global temperature. A 10-year-old kid today, 2025, has lived all his life with record temperatures. If you're 10 years old, welcome. All your life has been with record temperatures, because the record temperatures are in the last 10 years. Unlike the school director, who probably was born in the 60s, 70s, and lived his life during a much different period. So that's how the younger generations come with the environmental impacts of climate change on their own backyard, on their own skin, and seeing the effects much closer.
What are some innovative strategies or technologies that institutions can implement to reduce their carbon footprint?
There's several, from decarbonizing the energy they use, depending on the school location, is, in my opinion, one of the greatest impacts that they can have. From installing solar panels in the roof to generating their own wind electricity, the schools usually have a great advantage for renewable energies is that very few schools are open at night. Some schools, of course, but 99% of the time, schools are open during the day, where usually you have sunlight. And so, which is usually the highest misconception of the solar energy. It's like, oh, great when the sun is shining. And what happens when the sun is not shining? So, in this case, the schools, they usually operate within hours that the sun is shining. And that's the biggest example to your students, because those students, as soon as they leave, and eventually they will be the manager of whatever factory or whatever hotel or whatever company, they will think on what they had at school and say, well, my school had clean energy. I can implement clean energy here, and showing to the students that that technology not only contributed to lowering their emissions, to reducing their impact, but also to reducing their electricity bill. And I keep saying, and that's why I love to be here and talking about clean energy, because as you know, the energy sector is the one contributing with more than 70% of the world emissions. So decarbonizing the energy sector is crucial. I can guarantee you that a kid going every day to school in a hybrid bus or in an electric bus will have a totally different mentality than a kid going to school every day in a petrol or gas to their school. They will, again, see it by example. They will feel it. They will experience it. And whenever they are grown up, again, that takes time. Do we have that time? I don't know, but we need to start today with the education sector for when that 10-year-old kid that is at school today, when in 20 years, when he becomes part of the workforce and is able to make decisions, he makes the right decisions.
Diesel versus electric bus would be good for the students' health as well.
Of course. It's a win, all parties.
Study Net Zero empowers students to choose institutions committed to climate action. How do
Mhm.
you assess which institutions are genuinely committed?
So the goal with studying at zero is to attack the problem from both ends. I already spoke about the big generational gap that, in my opinion, is the biggest challenge for the education sector to dive into real action. And studying at zero comes on the other side. So with Fixterra, we help schools to get started. With studying at zero, we help to empower students to make the right choices as they are making the right choices on other industries. Students, well, young people today are much more worried on their choices, from clothing, technology, travel, food, so fashion. So as they're making the better choices when they in other sectors, it's like, well, sustainability should also be one of the factors you should consider when you're deciding for a school. And that basically sends a message to the ones that are not really active. What we decided with Study Net Zero is to create a methodology where we analyze which schools had, especially universities, had a net zero target by 2050. If they had published a strategy, a plan, a clear path to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, that's the ones that we considered to be included into the website. Unfortunately, those were very few institutions, what I call the 1%, because if you analyze how many schools we have in the world, from around 30, 40,000 universities plus elementary schools plus high schools plus colleges, there's about 200,000 schools in the world. So having less than 600 with those clear that it was a very time consuming process where we were visiting websites and analyzing the criterias and the reporting on these schools, because the first step to getting something done is to decide to do it. And unfortunately, many universities, when you would go to their website and analyze what their strategies towards sustainability, you would find absolutely no information. And that was the way we assessed it. The goal again was to empower the students to make the right choices, and that's how we ordered the institutions from the ones who have already achieved carbon neutrality, of course, many of them via offsets and via reduction, and those who had a plan by 2025, by 2030, 2035, 2050. And we did not include some institutions that we did find a few institutions that had set a goal for carbon neutrality in 2070, 2080. It's like, well, it's 2070. You're passing the problem to the next generation. This problem is urgent. It cannot wait 20, 30 more years to start with real action.
How can students effectively advocate for sustainability within their educational institutions?
I would say that the best way is speak with the university's presidents, rectors, provosts, rectors. Make your voice heard. That's what I would suggest, because with that generational gap, is that sometimes the institutions are worried with a lot of other priorities, which of course they're totally valid, but this is in a way the most urgent problem for your students, that they have a whole life ahead and they don't know if they're going to be having a planet to. So you're educating the future generations for them to have a career, to evolve, but career and education, it's nothing if I don't have a planet to live in. So the best way is make your voice heard with your superiors. And I know in some institutions that the sustainability initiatives are super well developed. It has been from top down, but in many others, it has been bottom up. It has been the students advocating, making their voices heard, and pushing their leaders to say, hey, no, we need to take action on this. We cannot continue like this or doing that, or doing our operations at school this way. And that's a great way to generate change, because again, if you compare education to any other sector, let's say, I don't know, I take the hotel industry. A few years ago, usually you would not have Wi-Fi in some hotels, and then clients started demanding Wi-Fi because I have Wi-Fi at home. I want to go to a hotel, and I need to have Wi-Fi. And 20 years ago, Wi-Fi was not common on every single hotel. Today, I can't imagine a hotel without Wi-Fi. It's a must-have. Why? Because clients have demanded to have that feature. At the beginning, some hotels were charging for Wi-Fi because it's like, well, no, it's an added service. We're going to charge more money for that. And then eventually they decided, it's like, well, no, we cannot charge for Wi-Fi. They have it free at the cafe. They have it free at home. Well, not free. You pay monthly fee. It's not reasonable for you to go and to a hotel and be paying 20, $15 when you have it free at the cafeteria or a cafe next door. So as it happened there, that the clients were demanding service, well, it's the same here. Students are demanding sustainability, and as school leaders, we need to listen to their demands and meet those expectations.
You have highlighted the climate and generational gap. How can educators bridge this gap and effectively communicate climate urgency to younger generations?
That's a tough one, because you cannot, usually in the education sector, you reach decision making power with seniority and with experience, which is reasonable. But I have not met a university president who is 30 years old. They usually get to those positions of power with seniority. And in my opinion, the best way to generate that is to bring students to the table. And what I mean to the table is to the board table, to the decision making process. I know in some universities it is like that, but in some others, no. And students should be sitting on your board always, because at least representatives from the student and have a voice. That's the best way, because understanding their choices is the key, and their concerns is the key to making a university grow and gain reputation as well. So the best way is sit students down on the decision table and give them a voice and a vote as well on what is being done. In some universities, it is like that. In some schools, especially high schools and so on, no, this is our main stakeholder, but we don't sit our main stakeholder to the table to decide with us because we know better. It's like, well, maybe in this topic, they know better.
Maybe they can hold town halls with the
With
students.
definitely.
What role does digital literacy and social media play in engaging young people in climate action?
Today, that's part of the transition that the education sector as a whole is trying to figure out, especially now with all the AI technologies being developed and so on. Students live half of their life here, at least the younger generations. And it's again a huge generational gap between the decision makers who probably is not. So it's fundamental to generate that engagement on social media. You want to reach your students on the platforms they are on. You want to tell them what you're doing and engage them in action on the platforms they are. Otherwise um, you're just handling the wrong. I remember a few years ago some universities would go, in my previous role where I was involved in recruitment, would go and recruit students overseas and would send emails to the students. No, we're following up via email. So, well, I don't think students are reading emails anymore. Are you following up with them on WhatsApp, on social media, on, well, no. Well, it's like if you're trying to send a letter or a fax to students, maybe they're not going to read it. You need to be where they are. So it's crucial to join. And again, you would know that better if you sit students to the decision table and they're able to tell you, no, we prefer this, and listen to them.
You've been involved in international education for nearly 2 decades.
Mhm.
How has your experience in this field informed your approach to sustainability?
It's understanding that international education is the within the education sector, and that's another of the challenges that the education sector has for maybe not acting that much on sustainability. There's no regulation in the education sector towards sustainability. There's a lot of regulation in terms of the curriculum, in terms of accreditation, but no regulation in terms of how you run universities, on how you run your operations, universities, schools, high schools, etc. And the main point here is that this is an international problem, and no one better to fix it than international students. It's as simple as that. Being an international student gets you out of your comfort zone. I was an international student myself, and gives you that way broad mentality of understanding the world from a totally different perspective, learning how others do it. Sometimes we hold no truth, and it's much better the way that others have been doing it, and sometimes it's the opposite. But getting that knowledge and understanding that, at least in terms of sustainability, we share one planet that doesn't know about borders. They don't know the borders that we have limited. It's the same. And that has to do a lot with climate justice as well, where in many countries, I was seeing yesterday huge floodings in the Congo, in Africa. And unfortunately, sometimes some of those disasters don't get to our TV because they happen in the global south, and they're maybe not as important. But that has to do with climate justice as well, where the ones who had the least responsibility into generating the climate problems that we're having right now are the ones suffering the biggest consequences, because also they are the ones less adapted, and with less resilient and with less resources to generate the solutions they need today to sort those problems out. But again, going back to your main question, it's key to bring the students and to engage them in a different way that what we have been doing up to now, because they hold the power, and without students, schools would be just empty halls. So they are the most important stakeholder, and we need to listen to them.
How can international collaboration enhance sustainability efforts in education?
Collaboration is key in generating these solutions, because no country can do it on its own. And that was part of what I was seeing recently in a conference, how while one continent, in this case Europe, is focusing on decarbonizing, we are on the other side here in some regions in the Americas. So that collaboration and setting unified goals is key to advancing, because otherwise you as one is undoing the other one. And there's where international education brings people together again, because you can have global solutions. You cannot have global solutions without a global mentality. And that's what we need, at least in the case of environmental sustainability, to find a unified vision that this is a shared problem that we all have as a planet, and we all need to collaborate to fix it. And I was recently seeing one of the new technology for concrete. That concrete usually is very carbon intensive process, and it was developed at a university in the US, but by an Italian professor that studied in Switzerland. So you see how someone so international, it's a studied bachelor's in Italy, PhD in Switzerland, and now he's working in the US in Northwestern University. Well, that's an international person. That's someone who has a different mentality and is finding solutions to specific to concrete materials, to concrete, to cement, but it's an international student. The collaboration that we make in the international education space between universities, between scholars, between students is the one is what's going to drive progress forward for international problems. We can solve our local problems individually in each country, but for international problems, we need international solutions, and that's how international education comes at bridging that gap.
You've worked on digital transformation within the education sector. How can technology be leveraged to promote sustainability in education?
Specifically related to international education, technology can be bridged to reducing some of our travel emissions, especially for meetings shorter, closing that distance with, as we are doing right now, thousands of kilometers away. We're right now using technology to generate this content and be available. So the same way students can connect, can get out of their comfort zone without the travel emissions that needs. Of course, nothing replaces the in person, but you can create much more. You can create calls, collaborative online learning solutions that really drive internationalization forward from a different perspective. So that way, instead of traveling 6 times a year, you can travel twice a year and still bridge the other opportunities with online solutions. So really, the digital transformation can bring a lot of solutions if we know how to make them better. Coming from the international education sector, for example, there's something that nowadays you're starting to see. But when I was a kid, sorry, when I was a university student before the pandemic, I was not seeing those experiences, which are blended programs. So usually you have on-site programs where you go to school every day, or you have online programs where you do it 100% online. And because of the reality of my job, and I wanted to do something blended where I could go to school maybe for a month and then continue online and then recatch again with all my peers next year, be with them 1 month, meet them, shake hands, and then continue online. Nowadays, you're starting to see a lot more blended programs because of that reality. But before the pandemic, they were very rare to have blended programs, even though we already had the technology to do that, to be part in person and part virtually. So technology can help enormously into driving sustainable solutions, reduce the travel, and also create more collaboration than what we currently have. Because there are some students that maybe they won't have the resources to travel and to experience something different. And today, with the technologies opportunities that we have, they can be sitting on a classroom with students from all over the world if we generate those spaces.
What are some examples of successful tech driven sustainability initiatives in education?
Well, some of those are the many more universities are collaborating on the COILS, which is collaborative online intent learning solutions, which are programs developed by various universities and where students can join that, allowing, of course, and then there's also a lot of technology embedded into the process of learning today, from online resources and from digital resources. When I was studying, I remember full stacks of paper. Now we're eliminating those resources with digital books and digital materials. So, in my opinion, there's a lot more to be done. The education sector needs to keep transforming and keep evolving, but sustainability is not only about reducing resources, it's about leveraging the right mindset to dedicate your time and energy not only to nurture yourself as a person but also to nurture the society and the planet. So technology can help enormously into generating that awareness with a lot more information that when I was a kid we didn't have available. Right now you need to know anything and you have it on your fingertips with a few clicks. So I think that's a great advantage, that today education needs to focus maybe not that much on what you learn, but how you learn it and in which environment, and what is the mindset that you get when you get out of university.
You've emphasized the importance of leadership in driving sustainability.
Yeah.
What qualities make an effective sustainability leader in the education sector?
This is, at least in terms of sustainability, it's something you need to really feel and drive forward. I would not be sure on what are the qualities, but it's something that needs to be done from the heart. Otherwise, it might lose its effect if you're doing it just because you're required to do that. In terms of sustainability, needs to be a whole culture that needs to change. It's not one action. You can install solar panels, great, you're going to reduce your emissions. But if that doesn't come with the right mindset and the right culture to generate behavioral change from everybody at the school, then that might be not reaching its full potential. So, in my opinion, changing the culture is one of the most important, and changing the systems is one of the most important thing that a leader can do there in a school, is saying, hey, we are educating kids for the future, and our future right now is in danger. What we can do in our environment of influence in order to contribute as much as we can into trying to change this future. This is what we can do. Let's do it, and do it with all your heart and all your power and all your energy, and as soon as possible, unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of time into fixing the global climate crisis. As I've heard, we are the first generation to see the effects of climate change, but at the same time, we're the last generation to be able to fix it.
How can institutions cultivate a culture of sustainability among faculty, staff, and students?
With training. And that was part of your initial question at the beginning. In some schools, this is not done just because the team, and when I mean the team, is from the administrators to the professors to the janitor to the person who runs the cafeteria at the school, don't have the training. But why they don't have the training? Because they went to school. The professors, they don't come from outer space. They went to school, but at school they didn't have the training. So what you can do with your staff right now at school is train them on why this is important to you as school and to your students, and that way focus again, because many schools, they do focus on what the kids learn, and they make a lot of training towards kids, toward the students. It's like, well, that is great, but if you don't train the staff, if you don't train the janitor to turn off the lights, if you don't train the person running the cafeteria that they shouldn't be using single-use plastics at the cafeteria, and if you don't train the administrators that they should focus on reducing their electricity consumption, well, you're losing an opportunity, and you're losing that opportunity to generate a culture. So the most important part there is training to everybody that has power to make, from small decisions to big decisions at the school.
You've been involved in various international events and partnerships. How do these collaborations contribute to global sustainability goals?
The Definitely, the talking about it is the first step to action. So that is what has been done in many conferences. And as I heard when I was in my very first initial conversations about sustainability many years ago, is any conversation about sustainability is a good conversation to have. And that is what we are doing in many of these conferences and events. We're talking about it, showing that this is important to our main stakeholder, which are students, and from there, empowering action, which is the most important. But if we don't talk about it, then action will never take place. And what I always stress as well in that field is sometimes being perfect is enemy of the good. And in some schools, some universities, they aim to do it perfectly. We're gonna work on sustainability. Let's do everything we can. Let's like, well, maybe it's not needed to do it perfect. Doing something is always better than doing nothing. And sometimes people get overwhelmed when you get first expose them to sustainability. It's like, oh, all of that, no, that's too much. I prefer not to do anything. And they opt for doing nothing, which is worse than doing something.
What are some key policy changes or regulatory frameworks needed to accelerate sustainability in education?
My honest opinion is that there's a lot of regulation in terms of the curriculum, in terms of accreditation, and there's a lot of focus on what a university teaches. Because again, if I want to set up a university tomorrow and get accredited, I'm sure I wouldn't, a university or a high school, I'm sure I would need to go through very rigorous accreditation processes that will assess what I will be teaching, but there's no criteria on how I will be teaching that, on what my premises will look like, on where I will be getting my electricity from, how I will be saving or not power, what if my buses will be hybrid, will be electric or not. So if I will have a plan or not to take action, as you would do it with a factory. For example, if I want to manufacture computers, I am sure I know nothing about that field, but I am sure I would have a lot of regulations on what I can do and what I can do in my factory in terms of environmental and in terms of other fields. And right now, that doesn't exist to the education sector. There's no specific regulation mandating how the school should be run in terms of operations, in terms of sustainability. In some cases, in some countries, yes, you do have some regulation. I know, if, for example, the UK is quite advanced in that, forcing universities in some areas of the UK, universities must have net zero plan and must publish it. Now, during this year, also the schools in the UK should have all schools should have a climate action plan. So that's some regulation. But in some provinces in Canada, when you're very large, you must report your emissions. So there's some regulation in that field. But mostly in the US and in other countries, there's no regulation on what you can do or what you cannot do in terms of how you run your school. There's great examples on decarbonizing campuses that have done perfect examples on new buildings and decarbonizing operations, but some others, without the regulation, you just are lacking the power to use that power of the education sector that we were talking at the beginning to educate by example.
How can educational institutions effectively measure and report their sustainability progress?
Data. One, and being transparent about that. Number one is report your emissions. Account for your emissions. You need to do a research, analyze your emissions. Normally, what we use is the GHG protocol that separates emissions on scope 1, 2, and 3. And basically, that's the same protocol used for emissions of many companies globally. So number one is have the data, because if you want to reduce your emissions, you need to know where you start. And today, if you analyze many universities, they don't even know what their emissions are. And high schools, even more. I would dare to say that almost very few high schools are analyzing their emissions. So having that data on your hands allow you to really affect change and saying, oh, 40% of my emissions are coming from electricity. Great, that's a quick win. I can install solar panels and I can reduce those 40% emissions to 5%. And So number one is accounting for your emissions and reporting, and then being absolutely transparent about those emissions is making them public as much as you can for people out there to know. Maybe there's nothing, again, nothing to hide in terms of your emissions. These are your emissions. Account for them, being transparent about it, and then showing what's your plan. It's deciding, sitting down, creating a climate action plan and saying, this is what I intend to do in the next 2 years. This is what I want to do in the next 5 years. This is what I want to do in the next 15 years. And from there, working ahead to making that plan happen. There might be changes, yes, fair enough, but going into the right direction is what needs to happen in the education sector. Some will go faster than others, but getting that plan written is the first step to action. And in some cases, there's schools without most cases, there's schools without a climate action plan. That's why when we created StudyNetZero, we decided to analyze those plans and say, what's the sustainability report look like? What's the plan? What's the goal? Let's focus on that. And that's how we set the bar on carbon neutrality. By this year, that's what we want. And that's how we include or not a university, because there's some universities doing great stuff, but without the plan and without the goal. So that is like, well, you're doing it, it's great, but maybe setting a plan is better, and being open about that plan, because you commit to do something, and that commitment gets you in a higher level of achieving that commitment.
Plan and measuring is very important. If you don't
Exactly.
plan and measure, you don't know where you're going.
I heard from a university, if we don't measure it, it doesn't get done.
Right. What role do certifications and standards play in ensuring accountability?
Certifications, there's a big, depending on the country, there's a small gap into certifying carbon neutrality and emissions. There's some guidelines on, but usually my certifications for smaller institutions may not be worth the energy and the time to go through the processes, because in some cases they're very, very rigorous process. For large universities, they might have more justification in terms of the budget that it takes to be certified by the different standards. But it's a complicated process to get certified on your emissions, and it's also a cost intensive process to get certifications. And in some cases, you're also studying for an exam. When you're going to sit for your SATs, you study the model of the exam, and so sometimes it can make you aiming to get the certification. It can make you lose track of what really matters, which is action and reducing the emissions you have. So you prepare yourself so much for the exam that you end up studying just for that exam, and you end up forgetting all the rest, which is also very important. So certifications, if it generates a value to your institution, fair enough. It's a process that can be done and can get certified. But I am not a huge fan of certifications, especially for smaller schools, because they will get all your energy focused on the certificate rather than all your energy and resources into getting the certificate, and maybe not that much onto doing what you can do, at least not for an initial step. Is you can start on by doing something by, and then maybe in the future, well, are we ready to chase that certification? Let's do it, we can go for that. But having the certification as the first goal, sometimes it's not the ideal scenario, because it's going to be very cost intensive and resource intensive as well, and you're going to maybe study for that exam and lose track of what really matters.
Absolutely. Take some action. What are the most promising trends or innovations in sustainable education?
What I love is from some universities that are including sustainability as there's few. One of them was Arizona State University. More recently, universities in California, UCSD, has done the same, which is mandating for sustainability or climate change courses to be a requirement to graduate on all majors. So no matter if you're studying law, or you're studying medicine, or you're studying engineering or whatever, There's one course that you need to take because sustainability affects every sector. And so that is getting students with the enough fundamentals that no matter in which sector they will end up working, they will have some sustainability knowledge, they will have some sustainability background. And it comes to the training part that we were talking before. So no matter in which position they are, those students, and that's a very bold decision from the university leaders to say, now, in order to graduate from this university, you must study this. It's a requirement, and some universities are that in my opinion, hopefully more universities will adopt that mentality and forcing sustainability as a required course to graduate.
Absolutely. We all need to learn about sustainability. How can we ensure that sustainability education is accessible and equitable for all students?
That's a hard one, especially in the global south. It's going to be a bigger challenge because when your priorities are sometimes sustainability is not, at least for the leaders, are not the main priority. But I think that's a lot to be done to creating and nurturing the right systems that will allow education to focus on that. And in some cases, it's exactly the opposite. I can guarantee you that there's some schools in the global south that are way more sustainable and are doing a lot more sustainable practices than schools in other regions of the world. So getting climate justice as one very, very important topic, especially to the global north, just to say saying like that, it's very important for making people understand in Europe, in the States, in Australia, in Japan, and the countries, again, in China, the countries that generated most of the emissions, that they are responsible for helping and financing the all those countries that right now are suffering the biggest in with the consequences of climate change. So it's not only stopping your own emissions, but also helping in what ways you can to the countries that are suffering from the effects. As you know, it's a complicated topic, but it's part of taking your responsibility for what has been done in the past 100 or 150 years since the industrial revolution.
Clean energy is becoming super cheap, and the cheapest way to power yourself. They can even take the lead since they don't
Yeah.
have the systems. So as they
Well,
get the systems, they can just be have solar and batteries and power their institutions directly.
one of the places in the world that is becoming a leader in green energy, for example, is the northeast of Brazil. Also, one of the regions in the world which is the poorest. Northeast Brazil is the poorest region in Brazil, and they have the highest. If I'm not wrong, around 50% is generated by wind and around 30% by solar. So it's almost 100% low carbon energy and all with newer technologies. And at the same time, you go north and you go to, I don't want to name any state, but you go to some states in the US and you will find someone saying, oh, I am charging my Tesla electric, I am being green. But hey, your Tesla is actually being powered by the local power plant, which is burning coal or burning gas. Having the electric car is fantastic, but if your electricity is being generated from very carbon intensive sources, that's actually not good. So the energy transition, in my opinion, it's key to decarbonizing the global south and the global north as well, because some countries are way cleaner than others and should be examples of clean electricity that should be adopted in the south in the north, but being so easy to implement, cheap, as you say, and also close to where the electricity needs to be used.
But that electric car, even if it's powered by fossil fuels, is still 4 times more efficient
Of
for the
course.
system and the society as a whole.
Definitely, but sometimes it's that duality on you're burning, but it would be much better. And of course, it's setting the systems to the future when all the grid comes from low carbon sources. So definitely, the electric transition is moving on, and we already have the technology. We just need to do it faster and implement That's why, and maybe I go off topic with this, but there's some conversation about carbon offsetting and companies saying, oh, we're going to plant trees or we're going to invest in this technology or that. In my opinion, the best carbon offsets are those who support, are those projects that really invest in clean energy because they're really taking emissions out of, maybe we're not seeing the effect as fast because they are new projects and it takes time for unplugging the power plants. But it's great to see those projects being implemented because those really, really take away emissions from the environment by generating the transition to clean energy. Because again, it's the sector that has the biggest emissions, and that way is how we can move forward to really clean, more sustainable planet by focusing as we would do it in a school. If I analyze my emissions and I see that 70% of my emissions come from a single source, then, well, let's attack that problem first because it's going to be the one that gives me the highest, the biggest wins. And that's my feeling with the energy sector. And that's why if you're going to invest in carbon offsetting, choose decarbonizing electricity and the energy sector.
What are the biggest challenges in scaling up sustainability initiatives in the education sector?
I think there's a lot that has been going on already, which is related to the rankings. It's great that rankings are, because universities usually, at least universities, they care a lot about rankings. And lately there's new sustainability rankings that were released that focus on how sustainable a university is. There's also great initiatives by ASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, which is not a ranking, it's a rating that assesses universities mostly on their operations and gives a rating on how sustainable the university is. But I think in order to advance, we need to talk more about it and make it part of the must-haves that universities should and schools should have. No one will send their kids or no one will choose a university that has that is saying, oh, we don't do this, we don't teach, we don't have. Always you look for a good reputation, for a good campus. No university will pride themselves in saying, oh, so we need to achieve that, we need to achieve that the universities pride themselves into being sustainable. And that's one more thing that everybody should have in order for being mainstream into the education sector.
How can we overcome resistance to change and foster a sense of urgency?
That's, I go back to my initial point, students advocating on. I don't agree with the students advocating and maybe being activists and painting jets, not in the wrong ways, but yes, on the right ways, getting to the table and demanding action. On the former ways, it's like saying, hey, this is our planet, this is a priority, we need to do something. Because otherwise, and the more you are, the better. Signing pleads, focusing for actions, because focusing leaders for action, because it's definitely, again, sometimes it's not because they don't want to focus, it's because they don't have the time. And especially lately, the education sector has been in with many problems. So when you have 10 problems to take care of, sustainability goes on being the number 11, and you don't have the energy or the time or the resources to focus on that. And you attack first your other 10 problems that are more urgent to your university, to your school. But hey, number 11, that's a global emergency for the whole planet. And sometimes that is the problem. If you cannot track how much you contribute to that, well, should we focus on that or should I focus on my other 10 problems? But I think students raising their voice is the key to moving forward.
For educators, students, and institutions looking to enhance their sustainability efforts, what practical steps do you recommend?
Measure your emissions, number one. Number two, set policies, set targets embedded into your strategic planning. It needs to be there. Then create a plan for action. What are you going to do when you're going to do it? Then train everybody, train all your main decision makers. And last, communicate it, because sometimes you can do all the other four very well, but if you don't communicate what you're doing, then you lose the opportunity to generate more buzz about it. So communicate what you are doing, report progress consistently every year. Have a sustainability report. It's like, again, that's the question. Does your institution, that your school has a sustainability report every year? You probably have reports on other stuff. Well, you should have a sustainability report as well. But the most important there is the policy. Last week, I went into his high school website. They had 20 policies like anti-bullying policy, privacy policy, transport policy, food policy, no sustainability policy. Like 20, all you can imagine, no sustainability policy. So having a policy on your website saying this is what we believe, this is what we're going to do, is very, very important.
How can individuals and institutions stay informed and engaged in the evolving field of sustainable education?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources that focus on sustainability and education at the same time. You have a lot of resources that focus on education and a lot that's focused on sustainability. So I would say make a mixture of both. There's some specifically focused to international education, but it's very hard. But to blend those right now, there's not a lot of information or not a lot of resources that focus on those, to be fully honest.
Sebastian, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. Your dedication to driving sustainability in education is truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks to you, Ali, for having me, and it's been a pleasure to be able to contribute with my opinions and my knowledge. Let's keep that in mind, that doing something is always better than doing nothing, and that our planet is asking us clearly, loudly, that we need to change our ways. So that's what I'm empowering here.
And to our viewers, thank you for joining us on Clean Titans. Please subscribe and follow us for more inspiring stories and insights into the clean energy transition. And if you have any questions, please note them in the comments as well as tell your friends about this podcast. Until next time, stay informed and keep making a difference.